Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Jesse Petrilla. Jesse is an author, and he's also a former Army captain with the U.S. military. And his I've asked him to come on to talk about his latest book, "If It Takes 1,000 Years, from Al Qaeda to Hamas: How the Jihadists Think and How to Defeat Them." Hi Jesse, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
I mean, I mentioned you're an army captain, so we were just talking about this before. So we were both in Afghanistan. Like our time there overlapped. I was a civvy contractor. I mean, I wasn't military. I always try to specify that because I don't want people to think I was there and like as a military person. But yeah, so we were there at the same time. So did this book take seed there, or like how did this come about?
Well, it was interesting that it actually started. I started writing it in 2005, and I was there in 2012. So I was ready to publish it before Afghanistan. It was almost done, or so I thought. And then it really all came together there, and that was the glue that really filled in all the holes that in my knowledge of how the jihadists work. Because I had an opportunity, I was the liaison officer to the Afghan secret police known as the NDS, which was I guess the closest equivalent would be the KGB. They were, in fact, some of the agents that I worked with were former KGB agents. The older guys were. It was really interesting. I had an all-access pass to the detention facility in Parwan, where they kept a lot of the captured jihadists. And my job was to facilitate the interrogations that the Afghans were doing of the Taliban and Haqqani and Al Qaeda guys that were there. And it was really eye-opening because I was able to. I knew what questions to ask them, and I took full advantage of having that access. I just getting to sit down and have, in fact, the first chapter of the book is called Tea with the Taliban. And that's what I did. I would drink tea with them and pick their brains and just say, hey, what drives you? What makes you tick? And a lot of them opened up to me. A lot of times they would say, hey, I'm not Taliban, but let me tell you exactly how it all works. And, and
Yeah,
it was hilarious. But the one takeaway that I had that I think sums up the entire book, which is where the title comes from, if it takes 1,000 years. Those were words that were told to me by a captured Taliban commander, where he said, "My children will fight you, their children will fight you. If it takes 1,000 years, we will win." And so, it every jihadist that I really researched, that I met, that I talked to, I got the impression they're fighting this incredibly long-term generational war where they don't care if they win. They, in fact, they I think have resigned themselves to know that they won't in their generation. So they focus on their kids. They focus primarily on indoctrinating the next generation and on incrementally chipping away at the West toward their ultimate goal, which all jihadist groups share. As fractured as they all share this one goal, which is establishing a global Islamic caliphate under Sharia law. And so they fight over how to achieve it, over how it's going to be implemented, over who's going to rule it, all these little things. But that's one thing that all the terrorist groups, all the jihadist terrorist groups that I've researched have in common is they all want that goal of the caliphate, and the West is in the way. And so that's really what it comes down to.
I come from a Muslim background. My family's Muslim. I left the faith a long time ago. And so, and that's what I was kind of speaking about when when I came back. I got back from Afghanistan in 2014, and I saw some of the stuff about Islam, and I'm like, you're wrong. Like, oh, ISIS has nothing to do with Islam and crap like that. And I'm just like, okay, you guys are completely wrong. And so I just started talking about, what I know from reading the Quran and like being brought up in the faith and being around it all the time because my family's still Muslim and my mom prays 5 times a day and whatever. So like I said, I grew up around it. I knew about it, so I would talk from that perspective. And that's what you're saying there is, you know, that's the kind of stuff I would say. Like to them, it's a holy mission,
Hmm.
and even if they don't do it, they have to make sure that the mission continues. And it's
Right.
like it's their commandment. Like they're taking a, you know, I mean, they're very, very fundamentalist, and they're taking things as literally as possible, and they want to, they want to rule the world. And yeah, they're going to quibble about who's going to run the world because it always comes down to that, like who's going to be in charge. So
Yeah,
they
that's
all
what
want to be
humans
top.
do. We're all
Yeah,
humans, so.
yeah, they want to be top dogs. So yeah, I mean, that's where you get like ISIS fighting the Taliban when in Afghanistan, or like squabbles between them all, and then obviously the Shia Sunni thing. But like apart from that, like did they? I mean, you're talking about chipping away from the West, but I mean, obviously this is you're talking 10 years ago or even before. But like with what you're seeing now, especially what's been going on since October 7th. Do you think back to what they were telling you about what, okay, we have to chip away at the West, and like how they were planning on doing that? Do you see some of that in what we're seeing like recently?
Oh, absolutely. The college campuses, I think, are the biggest example of them trying to get to the youth. The main focus being on the children really was a common thread as far as I mentioned their goals, but their tactics are really focusing on the kids. The Taliban would actually uh, set up and establish Islamic schools known as madrasas, particularly in Pakistan, just over the border, and as well as in Afghanistan. And I had one 15-year-old Taliban fighter really open up to me and tell me how it works. And I heard this story a few times after that as well from other younger Taliban members that their strategy would be they would go scour the countryside, they would knock on a poor villager's door and say, "Hey, we'll give your kids an opportunity for a free education, and we'll take care of them for the next 6 or 7 years." And these simple folks in the village would think, "Hey, what other opportunity for my kid to have would there be for him to get an education?" And so they would essentially give their kids to the Taliban. The Taliban would then take them back to these boarding schools, and they would live at the madrasa for several years. And then when they were about 14 or 15, they'd be graduating from them. And I asked the kid, what did you learn in there? And he said, from before sunrise to after sunset, they were learning fundamentalist Islam, just very fundamental. They'd study nothing but the Quran and the Hadith all day, and there would be no art. Art is haram is forbidden under Islamic law to paint or draw any living thing. So they wouldn't do any art. There'd be no literature other than Islamic teachings. There'd be no music. There's music is again against a Sharia law. There's different things that they would that you would think that some kid would typically want to get, history, that kind of stuff, basic education. That didn't exist. It was just nothing but fundamentalist Islamic education. And then what would happen when they're older, a lot of these most of these kids came from a tribe known as the Pashtun, which were more of a historic warrior tribe there in Afghanistan, and they would be telling them, "Hey, you've got to join the fight, join the jihad." They would just brainwash them for years, telling them this, and then when they would graduate, they'd say, "If you don't join, you're not a warrior. What kind of warrior are you? You need to join." And so everybody, all the teachers, all the other kids, everyone would join, and a lot of times they would be dead within a few years, and it's really tragic. I mean, they're robbing the youth of their life, and so they're taking these kids, they're brainwashing them. These were jihadist factories that would spit them out. And talib is actually the Pashto language word for student, student singular. Taliban is students. So these are the students of the Islamic schools, and and so it's really, it goes beyond just Afghanistan. They're focusing on our kids as well, on in trying to indoctrinate other people in the West, even if it takes a long time to get to them. And Iran, it used to come mostly from the peninsula. Back 20 years ago, a lot of this was coming from charities that were set up in Saudi Arabia and Wahhabi Peninsula, Wahhabi being the fundamentalist sect of Islam, coming from those countries. But now it's really shifted from there largely to Iran. Iran is really starting to fund a lot of these programs in the West, where they'll pay an activist to land on a college campus in America and march through the campus with a bullhorn saying "Free, free Palestine, join with me." And so you have a lot of these kids in America that will blindly march along with them without knowing much about the cause.
But I mean, like with the kids on the campuses, yes, there was Iranian funding, but when if you want to talk about funding and funding fundamentalism and basically funding apologia for Islam, it's Qatar. I mean, they're pumping so much money
Mhm.
into the universities. Like Iran doesn't have the money Qatar does. Iran has been sanctioned for, like they've had sanctions on and off. They're not as rich as they used to be.
Mhm.
Qatar is, and Qatar has been spending billions just funding universities and getting them to be more pro-Islam and, like I said, more apologia. Now, I don't
Yeah,
care
Qatar
if
is mostly Wahhabi as well, just like Saudi Arabia
yeah,
is.
I mean that
So
whole peninsula,
fundamentalist.
yeah, that whole peninsula. But that's like when I look at funding, that's what I'm worried more about that. I'm not saying I'm not concerned about Iran
Mhm.
funding, um, the kids on the campuses and getting them to go out and start these protests and block students and whatever. And now they're getting violent. Like that is concerning, and that's got to be looked at. But like I said, if you're looking at funding, it for me, it's Qatar that's got to be like highly focused on. I mean, I'll just ramble for a bit. In 2015, some friends of mine were doing an event at Harvard and they were speaking. So I went down to Boston and I went and saw them. And during one of the breaks, a few of us went into this ante room and there was all these plaques about money coming in from the Middle East,
Mm.
and it was all for like very specific Islamic studies. And it's just like, and even then we were like, hey, something's wrong here. And a couple of them, you know, wrote articles, got it out, tried to raise a fuss about it, but nothing was really done. And so this is not something new. Like they've been funding the universities for a while to put out their message.
Right. Yeah, and it's not just these are government uh, uh, sanctioned, government funded elements that we're talking about. But a lot of the funding that I found out specifically for madrasas, I assume extends to uh, other programs to indoctrinate youth as well. But the direct evidence that I saw for the madrasas, a lot of it came from average Muslims donating their zakat, their charity. The pillars, one of the pillars of Islam, as you know, is zakat to donate, just as Christians have tithing and other religions do as well. So you have average Muslims that are donating. It's supposed to go toward Islamic causes. They donate zakat to these charities that jihadists set up as they aren't even bogus charities because they are legitimately going toward spreading Islam and Islamic education. And so they say donate zakat to this for Islamic education. So they take that money and they send it out throughout the world to these different Islamic schools. Sometimes they funnel it through something known as hawala, which is like this paperless money trail. So they can't even trace who it came from once it lands in the location that it's going ultimately going to. And so a lot of the funding came from that I found, and it did come from the Peninsula nations for the madrasas. The Taliban schools were almost directly were almost exclusively funded from that from what I could
Oh
find out
yeah,
from the ones that I looked into. And so they come from these charities. They come from, and so you have average Muslims that don't even possibly support the jihadists or don't know anything about it, and they're just donating, and then it goes to this cause. And so it's really it's really frightening just how much they spread, and that's why it was very evident the effectiveness when Kabul fell in 2021, and you can look at the newsreels and see they're mostly young fighters that rolled in that toppled the government. Most of those kids that were fighting were not even born yet, or they were toddlers when 9/11 happened, and yet they overthrew the government and brought the Taliban back. And so a lot of them operated just over the border in Pakistan. Unfortunately, we were spinning our wheels in Afghanistan. Just I don't think we should have done any kind of nation building there. I think it's really up to is the Islamic world in those nations to figure things out and to reach that level of thought to handle a democratic republic, which they certainly haven't in Afghanistan or even in Iraq for that matter. But there's you can see where they're at, and I'll give you an example. of where they were in Afghanistan, there was one Taliban fighter that was brought in, and the interrogator came out laughing. And he said, "You know, this guy, he stopped me in the middle of the interrogation. The Taliban guy did. He was taking notes, the interrogator. The Taliban stopped him and asked through the translator, said, What's that stick in your hand?" He had never seen a pen before in his life. And so these were the types of people that were trying to teach Western democratic Republican style of governance to, and he's never seen a pen. And I mean, this was 2012, and so granted, and I mean that being, but I'll tell you, the game changer now that I think is causing the entire Islamic world to go through a very a kind of a identity crisis where individuals are doing soul searching like yourself did, where they see what's going on, they don't agree with it, they start to see other ideologies are out there, other ways of living. That kid that didn't know what a pen was in 2012, he probably has a smartphone in his hand by now,
Yeah.
and so it's like they're starting to see what there is, and they're seeing there's another way. And I think ultimately that's going to be the big game changer because before their Islam has this belief. It's in there. It's the Hadith that says, "He who changes his religion, kill him." So a lot of people, a lot of Muslims that aren't even jihadists recognize that whether it's something that they feel threatened if they were to change their religion, and it's genuine too. There are people that will kill people who leave the religion or want to,
Oh, trust me,
and
I know that.
yeah, and it's like, and it's in there, and so it would be very dangerous for somebody. It's easy for an American or a Canadian to explore their own spiritual journey and make their choices in a free country, but in Saudi Arabia you can't do that. They actually have laws on the book for death to apostasy, and or in Iran for that matter, or other places there are death death sentences for apostates. And so for someone to even question and start to explore their own faith and what they want to believe in, it's very dangerous, or it was previously. But now people can do it from the safety of their own home, and so they're looking at things on their they're watching videos, they're listening to podcasts, they're reading other scriptures, they're starting to see there's other ways, and so I think that's going to be the big game changer in the long run, and so we'll see. I mean, it's playing out right before our eyes. I've met so many people like yourself that might be from that background, but just very open minded and
Yeah,
it chose another path.
but okay, look, I don't disagree with you, but I'm gonna maybe like nitpick a little bit, and this is just
Hmm.
because I might have some inside baseball or something.
Oh
It's
yeah, I would love to
okay.
hear your
So
thoughts on it.
um, the first thing is after 2015. So when ISIS, well, actually, maybe I'd say a little bit later than maybe like 2016, 2017, when ISIS was no longer really a big threat, right? And it started receding in the Middle East. And I know this because a friend of mine runs this organization called Ideas Beyond Borders. And he's an Iraqi refugee. He came to the US. He's a citizen now. He grew up under Saddam. He was chased by Al Qaeda before it was ISIS, when it was Al Qaeda in Iraq. Like he was chased by them. They wanted to kill him. They killed his cousin.
Hmm.
And anyways, Ideas Beyond Borders translates science and philosophy books and makes them available in Arabic, Persian, and Farsi.
That's awesome.
And they've also um, teamed up with some universities. They started a university in Mosul, and apparently, well, from what Faisal told me, it's built right next to where ISIS's headquarters were.
Wow.
So I mean, so I'm getting stuff from him and from other people that I've spoken to from the region, and it was the youth after they saw what ISIS did, and just like you were saying, like, hey, this is what Islam taken to an extreme is, right? And so that caused an upsurge in people who started doubting or questioning or even trying to moderate the faith.
Hmm.
And part of that also has to go to, and it's okay, it's a little weird, but okay, so if you were to want to take a look at geopolitics in Islam right now, and I keep saying this, and there's other people way smarter than me who kind of say the same thing. It's 1979. Because 1979 you had the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and then in Saudi in the same year, a bunch of terrorists took over Mecca. during the Hajj,
Mm.
and there was kept very quiet. A bunch of the mullahs at one point went to the royal family, went to the king and said, "Look, we can speak to these guys. We can try to calm them down. We'll go on a religious, we'll bring in like religious reasons for them to stop, whatever." And the mullahs argued for more power. If you look at, sorry, this is like a long roundabout thing, but if you look at Southeast Asia, you look at like places like the Philippines, where or in Indonesia, where there is Islamic population, um, Afghanistan, uh, you know, at the end of the 70s, like they had gone through a couple of like civil wars and stuff, and the Soviets were coming in, so it's a little different. But Saudi and Iran, after that point, so starting in like 80, 81, so after 79, when those two things happened, and then you had a religious regime in Iran, and the mullahs got more power in Saudi, they started exporting Islam. And I mean, there was already Islam in Pakistan and all these places. I'm not saying there wasn't, but it was slightly more moderate. There was more influence from um, the uh, there was more influence from the Sufi side, and
Mm.
so it wasn't quite as extreme. But when the mullahs wanted to start sending people out, Saudi also said, "Hey, what the hell?" And Iran started doing some of the same thing, and they started sending out more of the fundamentalists. So yes, there's Wahhab. I'm not saying there's not Wahhabists, and there's the four different schools of thought in Islam, like like the madhabs and all that. Like, but they started sending a lot of the extremist imams out to Pakistan, India,
Right. Yeah, I
Indonesia.
saw it in Bosnia.
Yeah, yeah. And so
That was very secular
yeah,
prior to their civil war.
yeah, so they started sending all that out because A, it got it out of their region. Then
Hmm.
B,
Mm.
oh, we're spreading Islam. So now it's coming back, I think, to bite them in the ass because Saudi is getting a lot of grief from places like Pakistan because, hey, you're siding with Israel. Or, hey, you're doing this. You're supposed to be protecting the mosques, right? Like it's a defender of the two mosques. And so they're getting that grief, but they've pushed that extremism out. So I'm more hopeful for a reform in the Middle East. And I'm not discounting anything you said, but like it is, there is a lot of factors of why there's some moderation coming out, and it's more, I think, from the Middle East and obviously Iran. You see what the population is. They want to overthrow that government.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, but I'm less optimistic about places like Pakistan. I'm less optimistic about the Muslim enclaves in Indonesia and the Philippines and places like that. I'm Because they were in the Middle East, they got to see the different schools of thought in Islam, which they all can be taken to very harsh extremes, but there were some different ways of looking at it. Whereas in these places, when they were exporting Islam, they were exporting the most fundamentalist kind. I mean, one last thing, then I'll let you get it back to you. Is again around 2015 when all the refugees were coming into Europe, fleeing ISIS. Some of them went to the authorities and said, "We want to start our own mosque because the mosques you have here are too extreme." Because it was for the same reason. They were getting fundamentalist imams coming in
Mm.
and they were turning the mosque more and more extreme. So the local people were getting a far more extreme version of Islam than some place where people fleeing ISIS. like, you know, so yeah, sorry, I rambled for a bit there.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I saw it in Bosnia as well. I mean, I've seen it. There's a chapter in my book on Europe. There's chapters in different travels in Egypt, in other places that I went, where you see fairly secular societies that have just been that are being chipped away by fundamentalist ideals. Bosnia was under brutal communist oppression for many decades, and they weren't allowed to practice any religion. And you could see that in a lot of the former Soviet states as well. And the but in Bosnia in particular, there was a few folks that I met in Sarajevo. There's the biggest mosque in Sarajevo is the King Fahd Mosque, which was funded by Saudi Arabia, and of course they're going to put a Wahhabi imam there. They started building Islamic schools there, the madrasas with Wahhabi Islamist school of thought. And again, getting at the kids. These kids never. It's very rare that you would see an Islamic education in Yugoslavia prior to when Bosnia was made independent, and so they don't need to see immediate results. That's the thing. Is as I talked about before, they really look at generational warfare. They're going to spend 30, 40 years focusing on a kid, on getting on a few kids to get them get that at that next generation, and then they'll just each generation will become more and more fundamentalist until you don't recognize the place anymore. And it's really, I mean, there was a saying in Afghanistan that was very common that I heard from several mujahideen that said, "You have the watches, but we have the time." And so it was really, it's kind of creepy. It's like, oh man, these guys, they don't, they just, I don't, they don't think like us. I mean, Americans in particular, and in the West in general, a lot of times we think maybe 2 years, maybe four at most, because those are the re-election cycles of our
Mhm.
politicians. So the leaders are really only looking at what impact they can make in those 2 or 4 years. And these guys are fighting thousand-year wars. And it's interesting you talked about ISIS and how there's a lot of people in the West that say, oh no, it's not about Islam. It's not, oh, you're just a racist and what are you, an Islamophobe and all these things. It's like, look, we're not the ones saying it. They're the ones that are saying it. And it's like there's no question in my mind that these jihadists absolutely believe that they are on a mission from God, that these are commandments, that they truly believe it. And I remember there was a pamphlet that was being distributed around Afghanistan when I was there that I had translated. It was everybody, they were dropping these off and giving them out, and we found several. There were several Taliban members that were captured that had stacks of these pamphlets, and it was on Taliban letterhead. It was like, hey, it is your commandment as a Muslim to wage jihad against the infidel, and here are the Quran verses that back it up. And it was just, it was like there this is your duty. It was, I mean, it's them that's saying it. And so my book, if it takes 1,000 years, is really, it just says what they say. I do very little
No.
commentary in the first 2/3 of it. The latter 2/3, I talk a little bit about how we can approach this approach the solutions. And it's really, number one, it's about us getting to our next generation, making sure that they understand the values of freedom, they understand the values of human rights, of patriotism, and just making sure we protect what we've got. It's really a special thing that we have in America and in the West in general, that they don't have those freedoms in Iran or Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan. And and when you don't have those values, when you don't have the values that have a vision, you have kids that are very easily influenced. And I think that's what we're witnessing in America and in the West in general. Is you have a generation of children now who really feel like they lack purpose, and they don't have any, they don't believe in God. They don't think that they have God-given talents, that they were put on this planet for a purpose, on purpose. And I mean, I'm a Christian, and I that's a huge tenet of our faith, is that hey, God knows you, and God made you, and God gave you these talents to do something here. It's not like we're just a blob of cells, or that we're on some mission to blow ourselves up. It's like we have a commandment to love one another. That's the greatest commandment in Christianity. And but when you throw all that out, and you have a society that uh, doesn't really, that stops following those values. And in America, it doesn't, no matter what your faith is in America or Canada or the West in general, uh, this, it was built on Judeo-Christian values. And so even if if a member that lives in America doesn't subscribe to Christianity, there's still our laws, our culture. It still echoes that we don't steal, we don't murder, we don't. I mean,
Yeah.
these are things that are in our society, but it's not, and it's that's one thing that people in the West don't realize, that those are not things that are taken for granted in the Islamic world. I'll give you a couple examples. There was one of the Taliban members that I met that a lot of times the way that it would work is in an interrogation or interview, as we would call it in the politically correct term. We would drink tea with them, we'd hang out, we'd ask them about their family first. And we'd, hey, tell me about your family. One guy, he said very nonchalantly, he said, I have 9 kids. I had 10, but my daughter dishonored the family, so I killed her. Just like matter of fact. And it goes beyond just an individual criminal. I mean, this is if he hadn't killed his daughter, his friends and family and neighbors would be like, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't you kill your daughter? She dishonored the family. Are you without honor?" And unfortunately, we see this now uh, being exported into America. You had the case of Yasser Syed in Texas, who murdered his daughters Sarah and Amina Syed. This was, I don't know if you recall, I think it was
Yeah, yeah,
2005.
but you also had it in Canada. Like
Or
we're
in
not talking.
Canada as well, there were
Yeah,
several honor killings that
yeah,
I recall up there, and
yeah.
and these are just the ones that are being reported that were
Oh yeah,
classified as that, and so you have, and then what happened that made it worse? It's not just that he killed his daughter, but what indicates that it's more of a societal cultural thing, is that when he was arrested, he was only arrested because somebody spotted him over the fence and was like, "Dude, that's the guy." I mean, he was on America's Most Wanted, and on the run for over a decade. When they went to arrest him, they found out that several members of the Islamic Society there in Dallas had helped him, had aided him over the decade, and that they arrested and convicted his brother, his son. I mean, these are people that helped him evade capture because they thought that he did the right thing. And it's just so crazy. I mean, somebody who doesn't subscribe to that school of thought, if my brother or my father murdered my niece or a member of the family, and I would be like, what the heck? Let's go to the police. Like, this is outrageous. But they helped him, and it's just it goes so I think deep into that mindset that people in the West don't understand. There was a television show early on in Afghanistan after the government was overthrown, after the Taliban was overthrown, and it was called Afghan Star, and it was like an American Idol type
yeah.
show where a singing contest, and they let women participate in it. And one woman went on, and they did a documentary on this. You could look it up, Afghan
Mm.
Star, and they she started to sing and she started to dance a little bit, and she started to slip her hijab off while she was dancing, and it was like that was such a grave sin. The person who did the interview did a man on the street a walk where he was going up to people. Hey, what do you think about this? She became very famous. Everybody in Kabul, at least, or in Afghanistan, knew about it, and they were most people did. And what do you think about this woman? What she did? And so many people were like, yeah, she should be killed. Yeah, execute her. Yeah, that's terrible. Kill her. And it was just such a it, so it's such a different mindset that and it amazes me now that you see people, particularly on the left, that are marching along with these people on college campuses, and you see these signs like queers for Palestine and stuff like that. It's like chickens for KFC.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are don't it just shows that it's born in ignorance. They don't know the cause, they don't know who they're supporting, and they would be the first to be strung up if, God forbid, the Islamists ever won and established Sharia law in the West.
Yeah, I mean, like one, just a couple of things on that, like with the education, because this is something I've been talking about a lot, and I've been like looking into it a lot. One of the big problems is the way kids are being taught from K through 12. And I mean, I can give you the timeline, but after George Floyd, it just like that way of thinking spread across school boards across like districts across the US and Canada. And even before then, kids were being taught in some classes that you don't have to love your country. Like, the West is evil, white people are evil. Um, you know, and if like for someone like me, I'm brown. When I was criticizing Islam, I got called a white supremacist. Okay, I mean it's so like they'll even if you're not white, but you don't agree with their ideas, you've just become white in their eyes, and it's so to them it's like if you they attack the West. So there's kids are being taught this, and kids are being taught all kinds of, I mean, there was a book going around, and I don't want to make it sound like it was all over the US, but I know it was in Illinois, Virginia, I want to say Indiana, but I don't know for sure, but I know for Illinois and Virginia for sure. And it was being taught to like young kids, like kindergarten, first grade. And they had a page in it where it said whiteness was you selling your soul, and it was a contract with the devil. And they're
Hmm.
listing off things that are whiteness, like owning property and crap like that.
Yeah, talk about real racism.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah,
this is
yeah, no, but they're teaching kids to hate their value system. They're teaching kids to hate their country. I mean, this is going back a while now, but there was a it's like the Swedish foreign minister, but he was in the Swedish government, and he was, like I said, it was high-ranking minister, so he's in the cabinet and stuff. And he's like, oh, what does it matter if Swedish culture dies? What is Swedish culture? It means nothing. I mean, there's like from the government saying stuff like this. So you had this kind of crap as well. I mean, look, I'm an atheist. I don't want to get into a theological debate unless you feel like it, but like that. But
maybe another. We'll have to save that for another
yeah,
podcast.
like I mean, I'm not opposed to kids learning about religion, but I don't want any religion rammed down their throat. Like that's like that's where I'm coming from. But yeah, okay, look, and as far as the Judeo-Christian values, I agree with you to some extent because laws against murder would not have been made if the population did not prescribe to Christianity and you had the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, right? Like, like it's like you have that. And I'm not, so like the laws against theft and whatever. And the way I look at it is the founding fathers, from my reading, tried to make it as secular as possible, but the general population themselves were Christian, so what was woven into the fabric were those morals and those values.
Yeah, and it's the culture,
Yeah,
even if it's not in
yeah,
the government
yeah,
enshrined in
yeah,
law.
yeah. And so, like, I mean, that's like I said, that's where I'll agree with you. And like I said, we can nitpick and get into the, but I think if we can agree on that basic thing, the rest of it is just commentary. It's just you know, but yeah, like so. I think it's also the fact that these schools are going out and purposely teaching kids to hate their countries and to hate, Enlightenment values and to hate things that came out of the West. And so I think that's a big problem as well.
Yeah, I think I mean it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about purpose. Kids, a lot of them were busy parents, even if they
Mm,
aren't particularly from from broken
mm,
backgrounds or
yeah.
something. I mean, these are the kids, even if they're from just a regular background, they're in this day and age, unfortunately, with the standard of living that we've developed and with the technology too, the more connected we get, the more disconnected we are. And kids now, when you have two parents that are working, or if it's a single parent or what have you, you have kids are always looking. They're really. I think it comes down to parenting, and parents aren't there as much as they were in the 1920s. And it's really it's become so easy, and it's not just parents, it's friends, it's society. It's you can push a button and get a pizza, and we don't need to rely on one another. And what happens in that breakdown when that happens is you start you don't really need anything. I mean, we have all of our basic needs taken care of, but what we really do need on a spiritual sense is purpose and fulfillment, and that comes. I mean, that's the spiritual side of things, but kids don't have that, and so they're going to find that purpose in causes, and they're going to be easily manipulated. There's going to be there just isn't that there isn't that village to really support them as there used to be. Kids are depression is through the roof. They're trying to find purpose in all these stupid causes. I mean, if there you mentioned George Floyd, that even if there's validity to some of the debate on equal rights for blacks or for gays or what have you, the kids could definitely cause a harm on the tactics of how they achieve those goals. But they're not necessarily going to march off of a cliff if they're marching in favor of those things. But with the jihadists, when they latch themselves to that, they're going off the cliff. This
Oh
is
yeah.
not like another issue. This is something that they will march off a cliff, and they could bring Western society with them. I mean, this is just totally different, and that's why. And I think a lot of nefarious groups have realized that are trying to damage America and the West, and Canada as well. I mean, they're just trying to cause strife. They're trying to cause unrest, chaos. And it might not even be jihadists. I mean, you have Russians or Chinese or other actors out there that are just trying to cause discord within, trying to cause chaos within our society, and they're doing a darn good job of it. And I think it's even on social media. I mean, it's a large portion of it where they could fund bots or people to just go post, just throw grenades in different areas of issues and just say, "Hell yeah, yeah, here, look at this," and posting different things. I mean, China is notorious for doing that on TikTok. Their algorithm promotes the worst stuff to the top for us,
Yeah.
and so it's like, and it's interesting because you could go if when you go to China on their TikTok, the algorithm pushes like videos about mathematics and science and all these things, and for us, it's the twerking girls and the people getting in fights and all
Yeah.
these different. It's like it's just totally different, and it's on purpose. I mean, let's talk about purpose. I mean, this is like very deliberate, um, but yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, we've got to talk to our kids. We've got to get to the next generation. Let them know, hey, look, you've got all these great talents, and I believe they're God-given talents. That whether or not you believe in a God, I mean, these are our
Yeah.
creators' talents, and everyone has skills that they can use in this world. It sucks being between 18 and 25 nowadays because life is really good, and you when life is really good, it's weird how it sucks if it's good. You don't you get distracted because when we were working in the fields or in a coal mine or a steel mill or what have you back 100 years ago, you're not thinking about too many other problems that are out there. But now they're making crap up. They're looking for reasons to live. They're looking for things to do, and I think it's making a whole generation of lost kids that
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, look, I part of I think what it is as well is um you're talking about, like even if you have two parents and stuff like that, the problem also is regulation. So, you hear about the stories about the mother who left her kid in a park and went for an interview in a hairdresser, and then Child Protective Services took the kid away because it was
Mm,
abandonment, yet, the kid was 11 years old. Like, I was a latchkey kid. Like I mean, 11 years old, you should be able to sit in a park while your mother's across the street, like within view, right? It's stuff like that. So there's a lot of these regulations where parents are forced to continuously supervise your kids, and kids are always being supervised. They don't have the chance. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and yeah, school there was adults, but when we went out to play, there was no adults. And if we got into a fight, we got into a fight, and we figured things out. Now you don't have that. Kids don't get the chance to get into trouble or run across a
mm,
problem, have to solve it for themselves. There's always an adult around to fix it for them.
right.
And so, look, I'm not discounting what you're saying, but I think part of the problem too is we're hyper regulating it, and we're making it impossible for parents to do anything but just continuously supervise your kids because that's what the government's forcing them to do. Like, if you gave parents some time and the kid, like, I remember, like I said, I grew up, we'd leave on the weekends in the summer, like, we'd leave during the day and we'd come back when the streetlights came out, came on. And that was it. And parents wouldn't see us all day long. But now you can't do that.
Yeah, I think
And,
that coddling of kids, that making them live in this bubble, really it goes hand in hand with what I was talking
mm,
about. I mean, it makes it so that when they're thrown out in the real world, they don't have a clue what is going on,
yeah,
not just outside of our borders, but even in the rural parts of North America. I mean, these are this is and they're so shocked. I mean, I'm in California and I live a couple hours from San Francisco, and it is night and day the culture here versus down in the Bay. And it's like you go down there and all these purple haired people are like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, this is why can't you see things like I see them? And it's like, that's because you have cars that don't have drivers driving around. Like,
yeah,
it's not, the world is not like this. Like, this is not yeah, it's just so crazy. And they're all just sitting around in these, uni view. I don't know the word, but they all share the same view where there's no, uh, they don't tolerate any dissent, and so they're all you get the same people that just lack any kind of input from reality, and yeah, and then they're shocked when they go somewhere. And so I think, I mean, traveling really helps getting kids to
Yeah.
see how things are. I wrote my book to really be. It's very readable. If you have kids, if specifically if you have college kids, get them a copy of it. This it I traveled. I spent about 20 years, traveled to about a dozen countries to write it, and I just explain what I saw. And I mean, there are things out there that are just so different than the way that we think, and kids need to understand that. I mean, the cultures are different. Where I think going to the back to really the Islamist movement, we have to remember uh, where Islam grew out of and where these jihadist groups came from. It's really these are largely or were largely tribal societies. Even Saudi Arabia and other places that now have kings and pretty authoritarian governments. These were nomadic tribes that 1,000 years ago or 1,400 years ago when this stuff was developing.
Well, okay,
And
sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. And I just a small correction. These were nomadic tribes, up until the time of T. Lawrence, right?
that's true. Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Saudi
So
Arabia is the Arabia that
yeah,
belongs to the House of
it's true.
Saud, right? Saud, the Sauds were a nomadic tribe. They were the
Yeah,
biggest ones, and they won. They took over. Like
so
that's
yeah, the tribalism I think is something that people need to understand. I remember my first visit to the Middle East. I went to Jordan, and I was shocked. And Jordan's a very open, secular
yeah,
society, and it's pretty normal compared to many other parts of the Islamic world as we would view it. And I'm traveling along. I hired a driver to take me around to different places, and I'm going down the desert highway. And there was some interesting villages I wanted to stop at. And I'm like, hey, I want to stop at that village. Let's stop. And he said, are you crazy? We can't stop there. We're not part of that tribe. And I'm like, what the heck? Imagine you're driving through, I don't know what, driving through Montreal or whatever, and you're like, I can't stop at that town. I'm not part of the tribe. I mean, it's just totally, it's such a different mindset. And I was
oh
like,
yeah,
okay. And then in Afghanistan, it was like tribalism is on steroids there. I mean, I'll give you an example. There was the Nuristani tribe is one tribe that I learned about there. In order to be the equivalent of a city council member or a village leader in the tribes of the Nuristani, you have three prerequisites. You have to entertain the village 10 times rather at a banquet. You have to be a good orator, and you have to murder five rival tribe members. And so every member of their city leadership or the village elders, they're all murderers. And it's like, and that's the normal thing in that tribe. It's like they've been doing that for 10,000 years before Islam came there. And so so Islam came out of those societies, and for the last 1,400 years, those societies have developed intertwined with Islam. So it's very much there's a lot. Tribalism plays a big role in this issue. And so even if it's not in Islamic doctrine, a lot of their methods, a lot of their thought process, a lot of the way that the jihadists operate comes from tribalism. And when Islam arrived in the 7th century, it was this melding of beliefs that just was this fit that created what we have today, and we're still dealing with. I mean, these uh, when they were marauding through when the Umayyad Caliphate was spreading throughout North Africa and trying to get into Europe, and eventually stopped at the Battle of Tours in 732. These were It's really the same thing that we're dealing with today. It's like instead of raiding caravans and running around on horses, they're flying planes into buildings
yeah.
now they're marching on campuses and they're doing other tactics that it's like just slowly changing things, but they all have the same goals. This is just This is, I would call it, we're in the middle of the third jihad. The first being after Muhammad, you had the Umayyad Caliphate spreading into Europe. Then you had the Ottoman Turks and other elements spreading in the 1300s, stopped at the gates of Vienna. Then now we've got ISIS and Al Qaeda and the Taliban, all these other groups that are trying to get it started. But I think the difference now is these are not really, they're not armies like they were before. This is something that is, and now we're all connected. And like we talked about earlier, you see everything instantly that goes on. And so when you have ISIS committing all these horrible atrocities, trying to strike fear into the hearts of unbelievers, you realize they might be throwing people off kilter a little bit, but they other Muslims see it, and there's so many that I think, wait a minute, like I just want to raise my kids. Like this is not what I want. I want to like I don't like this, and they don't like what they're seeing, and so they're doing a lot of soul searching. Whereas before they would never see it. They wouldn't see what was going on. They would see the gains
Yeah,
with militarily and that kind of stuff, but it's not like they would see people getting beheaded on live streams on Facebook. And so it's like, or on Twitter. It's like this is something that I think is eventually going to shake out very much in the detriment to the Islamists, in that you're seeing waves of people who are from the Islamic world that don't want any part
yeah.
of this movement.
But one of the things you're talking about, the tribalism there. So there was a couple of things that I spent all in all close to 7 years in Afghanistan, I think.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
I was off and on between contracts and stuff, but so a couple of things that I'd heard, and one of them like I knew about already, but one of the things I learned there was, the carpets and stuff they'd sell in the markets,
Hmm.
right? It was on one of those carpets, but it was embroidered in and it said, "My family, my village, my clan, my tribe, my country," and that's what I'll defend in that order.
Mm.
So I'll defend my family against my village. I'll defend my village against my clan. I'll defend my clan against other clan members in the tribe.
Yeah,
Then I'll
that's
defend
it.
my tribe against other tribes. Then I'll defend my country against other countries. And that's so like there was that. And the other thing was the guest right. And the guest right I knew about before, but what I didn't know and I got to find out when I was there was no, I'm not talking about the leadership and I'm not talking about high up in the Taliban or Al Qaeda or anything like that. But the small villagers and these small villages, for them, bin Laden was an invited guest, and the US and NATO were foreigners coming to take their guest. So they were duty bound to
Mm.
protect their guest. So, I mean, like, it's some of those mindsets that you just wouldn't think about. I mean, okay, yes, there used to be guest right in Europe going back, if you go back to the Middle Ages, but we stopped doing that, right? Like,
Yeah.
like you're not
Yeah, the
responsible.
Lone Survivor, they did the movie about that guy where he survived because somebody took him in as their guest, and even though he was a NATO soldier,
Yeah,
that's how he survived, and they wouldn't give him up to the Taliban, even though
yeah,
they probably were much more sympathetic to the jihadists than they were to this guy. It's like he asked to be a guest, and he's their guest, and they would die to protect him. It's just such a different. But that was tribal law. Tribal
yeah,
law
yeah.
was above everything else. It was really wild.
Yeah, no, yeah, there was like I said, it's and obviously if you go to the Philippines, the Muslims there aren't, they'll share common Islamic beliefs, but they won't have, and they might have a different tribal system there
Mm.
than they would in Afghanistan. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it grew out of those nomadic tribes, and those nomadic tribes fell underneath the banner of Islam, at least until Muhammad died. Then there was, the whole schism between Shia and Sunni, and then you had all kinds of other fights. Look, I'm taking a look at the time. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I'll give you a last word if you want to talk a little bit more about your book, and I'll put the links to where people can get it. And if you have any other links you want me to add in, just let me know.
Sure. Well, this book is available on Amazon. There's a audiobook version of it that's being recorded now that you can buy. You can pre-order rather on Amazon. It's in paperback, available right now. You uh, should I would recommend getting it if you have kids, for sure, as a gift. I mean, this is something that there's been surveys that I've seen about kids on college campuses after the October 7th attack. There was a group called Generation Lab. This was reported by NBC, that surveyed whether or not college kids support the attack. And it showed 1 out of 8 kids in the week following the October 7th attack actually supported the Hamas attack against Israel. And then 6 months later, they did the same survey again, and it was 1 out of 4. And
Yeah.
so it just shows, I mean, we're completely failing to educate the post 9/11 generation. And I think this really goes beyond any kind of partisan politics. This is something that we are all in the sights. I think the entire secular world is in the sights of the jihadists. And we need to, I mean, education is the knowledge or the weapons, they're the ammunition in an ideological war. And that's what this is. It's an ideological war that we're facing. And if we don't get to the next generation, someone else will. So we've got quite the fight. Uh, but yeah, I really enjoy our conversation, and yeah, thank you
No,
for
no.
having me, for
Well,
allowing me to talk.
yeah, thanks a lot just for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back.